There are 8 million stories in the Naked City.
Even if you've never seen an episode of the classic TV series Naked City, you might have heard that line before. The reality is that 8 million is an underestimate. There are stories everywhere. My name's Scott Blevins, and that's what we're talking about today. There are nearly 8 billion people in this world. There are only 3 stories per person, which is probably low. That means there are at least 24 billion stories in this world. Think I'm exaggerating? I'm not. Right now on Amazon, there are 4 to 5 million titles. In addition to that, Amazon adds 2,500 to 4,500 new titles, new books, new book titles, new stories every day. Yep, you heard that right. 2,500 to 4,500 new titles on Amazon every day. And that doesn't even count Audible. It doesn't even count Netflix. It doesn't count Disney, HBO, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, BBC, or PBS. That's fiction stories, nonfiction stories. It's history. The fact is, stories are everywhere. People have stories that they want to share, and people want to hear stories, or they want to read stories, or they want to listen to stories, or they want to watch stories. People love stories. The question I have is why? Why so many stories? Now, if this were a different kind of YouTube broadcast, I'd put my crack research team on the task of polling thousands of authors, script writers, screenplay writers, poets, and movie makers to find out why they do what they do. And then I'd have them poll tens of thousands of consumers of stories, readers and listeners and watchers to find out why they want so many stories, why they do so much reading, so much listening, and so much watching. But this is not that kind of broadcast. This is about stories. There are a lot of stories. There are more than 24 billion stories in this world, and one of those stories out there is mine. And this series that we're doing on YouTube right now, I'm going to be sharing some of my story over the course of this broadcast. And so when we jump into the question of why are there so many stories, I'm going to start by sharing my whys. Why do I love stories? Why do I love reading them? Why do I love watching them? Why do I love hearing them and telling them and writing them? I do. I love stories, and I have loved stories for as long as I can remember. My earliest stories were stories that my mom and my dad read to me as bedtime stories or other times, and then I heard amazing Bible stories when I went to Sunday school. I also loved hearing stories told. I loved Saturday morning cartoons. I loved the evening primetime shows. And then something truly amazing happened. In my 4th grade year of school, Mrs. Savage, one of the best teachers I've ever had, and she started reading to the class a book, The Hobbit, by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I was hooked from the beginning. I loved that story. I loved listening to Mrs. Savage read it to us every day, and because of that, I began to read those kind of books myself, and I got lost in the world of Middle-earth with J.R.R. Tolkien, and then lost in the world of Narnia with C.S. Lewis. I loved those books. I loved those stories, and I moved from there, and then I found another teacher introduced me to Terry Brooks in the Shannara series. Then I found Stephen R. Donaldson in the Thomas Covenant series, and Isaac Asimov and the Foundation series, and the Robot series, and Frank Herbert's Dune series. And then much later in life, when I had little kids of my own, I found the J.K. Rowling Harry Potter series. I loved the stories that those books contained. I got a few reasons why I like stories. One of those reasons is escape. It's escape. I love going into those other worlds. You know, I love imagining that I'm on that quest of the ring with Gandalf and Frodo and Sam. We would go to family reunions, and I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the people. But invariably, I would find a quiet corner, and I would sit there with a book, and I would read Lost in the World of Narnia or Lost on the Planet of Dune. I enjoyed the affirmation when I enter into those stories and I meet people that are like me, meet people that I can relate to, and those people are good guys, and those people are heroes, and those people are doing amazing things. That affirmed me. that strengthened my sense of identity and who I saw myself as and who I wanted to be. I love the hope that came from those stories. The good guys always won, and they always carried with them a sense of hope that no matter how bad things looked, no matter how dark the night got, that good in the end would triumph. I love the courage that those stories seem to inspire in me. The examples of people sacrificing themselves at great risk, having the courage to face pain and death and destruction, to do the right thing, to pursue the good, to overthrow the evil. I love the role models that I found in those stories. It's tough to find a better role model in this world than Aragorn, son of Arathorn. I love the security that brought. A good story gives a great sense of security. For those reasons I've already mentioned, the good always wins, that right always triumphs, that evil and darkness are always overthrown by goodness and light. I love the laughter and the joy that come from reading the stories. J.K. Rowling, one of the funniest writers I've ever read. I loved reading those books. We read all of those books, Amy and I did, aloud with our kids when they were young. And we laughed. We laughed so much as we read those stories together. And we learned. That was the other thing I loved about the stories. And you couldn't have told me that when I was a kid that I was learning, but I was learning. I was learning about right and wrong. I was learning about courage. I was learning about vice and virtue. I was learning about hope. I was learning about persistence. I was learning all of these ethical and moral and social and economic and political ideas even before I realized it. It wasn't really until college when I had a professor who loved the Dune series and opened my eyes to see how in a novel, you could learn about politics and economics, and you could learn about social and ethical relationships, and you could learn these kinds of things and the ways that good stories could explore big ideas and significant concepts. These are some of the reasons why I love stories. Maybe I'm unique in that. I don't think I am, but maybe I am. I would love to hear, and you can put that in the comments down below, or you can email me at scott@garfieldchurch.org. And if you love stories, I would love to hear why you love stories, what you get out of those stories, what kind of stories that you love. One of the things that stories do, and I know they've done this in me, and again, I was not aware of this as a kid. I've become aware of it more and more as I've gotten older, is how these stories that I have consumed over the years have shaped my identity. And how stories don't just shape my identity personally, but how stories shape our identity as families, our identity as nations, our identity as ethnic groups, as various cultures and subcultures. Stories have a powerful way of shaping identity. Every nation has its national stories. Every culture, every family has its stories that say this is who we are and this is why we are who we are. Now, those stories aren't always true. That's an important distinction. On Wednesday, when we do our deeper dive, we're going to get into in some real deep ways and significant ways, not only how stories shape our identity, but how false stories or expunged stories or ignored stories can misshape identities of people and nations and cultures and families and ethnic groups. And we'll get into that a little deeper on Wednesday. All that want to shape my identity, your identity, how we think about ourselves, how we think about each other, how we think about the world that we live in, what we should be afraid of, who we should be afraid of, who we should love and who we should hate, who we should care about and who we don't have to care about, who's threatening to us and who's our ally, what it means to be good and what the good life is, who the villains are that need to be overthrown. We have to be intentional at some point along the way. We need to become intentional about what stories we're going to allow to shape us. And we need to do a reality check and look at the stories that we've allowed to shape us and see whether those stories are true or false. Do those stories reflect reality, or do they misshape reality for a particular reason or goal or agenda? We need to do a reality check. We're going to get into that a lot in the month of November in this series. I just want to give you a heads up as we look at Thanksgiving and some of the historical stories that have shaped our identity as the nation that we call the United States of America. I'm finding I need to be willing. I need to be willing to endure the hurt that comes with that reality check, the anger, the fear, the pain that's triggered when some of my core stories get threatened by competing stories. And rather than just shut out those competing stories, to say, okay, I'm going to listen, because maybe that's a truer story than the story that's shaped me and my core. I want to invite you, as we do this as well, to allow the Bible to be one of the stories that shapes your story. About 50% of the Bible is stories. And those stories give us a picture of reality. We're going to look at that as well, too, and the different stories and even the competing stories that exist within the Bible itself. I invite you to let those stories of the Bible shape your story. Let it shape your personal story, your corporate story, your understanding of the national story, of the faith story, of your ethnic story. Stories, man, they're everywhere, and I love them. I am on, this is just part of my DNA. I believe it's part of how God wired me. It's just who I am. I am on a never-ending quest for good stories. That's a big part of where this series came from, is my never-ending quest for good stories and true stories. And it's a big part of where this whole series is going. And I'm going to hope you will join me on that quest. Sometimes it's going to be fun. Sometimes it's going to be scary. Sometimes it's going to be painful. But I hope it will always draw us closer to God and deeper into God's stories. On Wednesday, we're going to dive deeper into this question about identity and false stories. And thank you for listening to my story today. I'll be back in the next episode to tell you more of my story and look at some other stories. Until then, I'd love to hear what you think about this episode. Even more than that, I would love to hear some of your stories. So leave them in the comments or email me at scott@garfieldchurch.org.